Aycock Media has created a place to talk about politics in a way that promotes civil discourse with truth and respect. This is In the Arena.
I'm Barry Aycock.
And I'm Phillip Britt, and we're honored to be joined by Democrat candidate for Missouri Governor, Representative Crystal Quade. Representative Quade was first elected to the Missouri House of Representatives in 2016. After her first term, she was chosen by the Democrats as Minority Floor Leader, a position she has held for the last 6 years. Welcome, Crystal Quade, to In the Arena.
Thank you so much for having me.
Welcome to historic Malden Air Base in Malden, Missouri.
Thank y'all.
So, State Representative Crystal Quade, tell us a little bit about yourself, your family, where you're from, where you live.
Yeah, so I grew up in rural southwest Missouri out in Webster County, and I come from a regular working class family. My mom waited tables my whole life, actually just till a couple weeks ago, in fact. And my stepfather drove almost an hour into Springfield to work in a factory, and I'm the very first in my family to graduate from high school. I went on to Missouri State University, it was Southwest Missouri at the time, to get my degree in social work. And that is really when I first started to pay attention to government and get involved in that. Understanding everything I wanted to do to help people was dictated by public policy. So I got to do an internship while in school in our state capital, Jefferson City. And really while there as a student was when I got bit by the bug, so to speak. Quite frankly, I'll never forget hearing these lawmakers talk about working class families like mine with a lot of lack of understanding and oftentimes disgust in the way they talked about us. And so I decided in that moment as a young person that I wanted to get involved. I had the great honor after school of working for Senator Claire McCaskill, working for the United States Senate. I did some campaign work and hated every second of that. Went back home to Springfield, became a social worker, and started my family until I first ran for the State House.
Some people call that a genetic defect, not the bug.
Well, I know exactly what you're saying because I spent a session in Jefferson City as an intern and then felt like that was where I was called to be. So I understand exactly what you're saying.
Yeah.
All right, so you've been, and as you just say, you've been in the arena. You know, we named this show In the Arena to talk from Theodore Roosevelt's speech, The Man in the Arena, The Woman in the Arena. we like to change that up periodically, but it's about the people that are actually actively engaged. It's not just the ones who sit back and criticize that are important. And so you ran for state representative in the last 6 years. As I mentioned, you've been the House Minority Floor Leader. But running a statewide campaign is different. So tell us, what's been the most enlightening thing you found on the campaign trail?
Yeah, I would say, not so much enlightening, but reaffirming, which I appreciate. Having gotten elected down in Southwest Missouri, it's not just Democrats who voted for me. I have to talk to every single person, regardless of political affiliation, find places where we can agree to win those elections. And what's been really great about running statewide is it's the exact same thing. I've got to show up everywhere, not just in the huge Democratic performing cities, but it's important that I'm in every corner of the state. And what has been affirming is that the partisan, the things that are nonpartisan cross boundaries. Everyone is concerned about our public education funding, regardless of where they live. Every place I go, folks talk to me about the cost of healthcare and the accessibility of healthcare and how terrified folks are to go to the doctor's office. Childcare access, these issues that are important to people cross partisan lines, and it's been really great reaffirming that as I travel the state of Missouri.
State Representative Missouri hasn't elected a Democrat since 2018, Nicole Galloway. They haven't elected a female since 2018. How will you overcome those challenges?
We're doing it the same way that we did in 2016 when we won our first race down in Southwest Missouri when I probably wasn't supposed to. And that's by showing up and talking to people. I had my yard sign right next to Donald Trump yard signs in the same yard as a pro-choice Democrat. And we've been winning races by having these conversations with people, by being very open and honest about where my positions are on things and not waffling. But most importantly, finding those areas where we can agree. And as I mentioned, there are so many areas that folks are concerned about, that they want their state government focusing on, that cross-partisan divides, and that's how we won in 2016, and I know that's how we can do it again this year.
So if you're fortunate enough to be elected governor, you have to deal with a heavily majority Republican state House and state Senate. There have been a supermajority for a decade, which means pretty much veto-proof. How do you deal with that challenge? That's a real challenge for a Democrat governor. How do you overcome that?
It is a real challenge, but there's kind of 2 points that I want to make on this. For one, the Republicans have had a supermajority in every statewide office for the last several years, and we're seeing less and less get done. We're seeing a less and less functioning government. In fact, last year we had the least amount of bills passed in Missouri's entire history, even counting COVID when we all took half the year off, because when there is too much of one side, and I think that I would say the same thing if the Democrats were in charge, when there's too much of one party, we're not getting anywhere. And folks have seen, I mean, we all saw the primaries back in August and how disgusting they were on the other side. That same type of thing is happening inside the building as well. So it's not functioning now. And I know as governor, I can bring some balance back and bring us back to a discussion where we're actually moving our state forward. But I would also say, as having been the longest serving leader for either party since term limits have been put in place, I've served alongside multiple speakers, multiple floor leaders, and multiple governors. And the first thing that I realized is it doesn't matter who gets the credit as long as we're getting something done. And I've built relationships with these folks. I know their kids' names, because that's what you have to do in Jefferson City to move the ball forward anywhere. And so as governor, I know that I can bring those relationships to that office and continue down that same path.
Good. Even though our legislators here in Southeast Missouri are a member of the majority party, people here in Southeast Missouri don't feel like their voices get heard. How can you assure that Southeast Missouri voices will be heard? How can you carry that with you to Jeff City if you win the election? Yeah,
I think that's an important thing that, quite honestly, I hear in a lot of places. And it's often because their elected officials are not voting for what they want them to be doing. I think public education is a great example of that, where we've seen a lot of rural lawmakers vote for expansion of charter schools. And what that is taking public taxpayer money and making it transferable to private and religious institutions. Well, a lot of our rural communities don't have a choice. That public school is the only thing that exists. And so there's example after example where their elected leaders are not representing them. What I want to say to folks is, look at my record. Last year when the aluminum plant shut down, I reached out to Governor Parson very early saying, hey, this is happening. We're about to lose 500 really important jobs down here, and we need to do something about this. I put together a package. I even arranged a meeting for the owner of the plant to fly in from Switzerland to meet with the governor's office. Now, the governor didn't show up for that meeting. His staff did. But I filed a bill to try to move that ball forward to save that plant. And so even though I don't live here, my record shows that I have been paying attention to not just the Boot Heel, but all across the state, because as an elected leader, it's our job to be paying attention to every single piece of the state of Missouri.
I have a follow-up question to that.
Yeah.
Many of our legislators did vote for charter schools. Mm-hmm. Our public school system's a big employer here in Southeast Missouri. Sometimes it's the only employer in town. How can you bridge the disconnect between teachers, administrators, to make that issue important to them? Because when our state rep, our state senators go and vote for charter schools and they come back and sell it to the public school that it's good for them, there's a disconnect there.
Yeah. I think that's a multi-layered question. And the first thing that I have to say, as the leader of the Democrats in the House, a big part of the problem has been that we've had a lot of uncontested races. And we haven't had folks holding each other accountable. And that's been going on for a very long time. Again, regardless of party, if you just have one person running and nobody challenging them, then they can say one thing at home and do something completely different when they're in Jefferson City. And that's what we've been seeing. And so step one for that is showing up in these spaces and having honest conversations about when we vote to expand charters and to expand vouchers. It literally takes your public money and sends it to a different school outside of your home. And it puts our local schools in jeopardy. We've got a third of our schools now on 4-day school weeks. And that started because of a budget problem. Now it's because of a recruitment problem, not just for teachers, but our cafeteria workers, our school bus drivers. It's so hard to get folks to move into these communities to work in these schools. schools. And so we've got to show up and be honest about what's going on here. And some of that falls on, the party for not having folks running for office. But we're working hard in that space and obviously showing up where we can. But it is a real problem. And you're exactly right. We've got to make sure that folks understand how this works.
So do you ever hear out from these rural districts, these rural teachers, rural superintendents, principals? I mean, their state reps and state senators are voting against their local interest, but there's a disconnect there because they're still voting against their own interests.
Yeah, to answer your question, occasionally, we'll have folks come to Jefferson City and talk. We do get some emails, folks asking some questions. But again, when you're just hearing from one person and they're telling you, this is great, I care about you, you know me, you trust me, I'm gonna do what's best for our community, and then they go do whatever it is that they're doing, voting to send the taxpayer money away. If there's nobody at home saying, wait a second, that's not what this actually does, then I don't fault the educators or the parents who continue to vote for those people because they're only being told one side of the story.
So Malden, Bernie, New Madrid, Sykeston, what's the advantage of their money, their taxpayer base, shipping their money to a charter school?
There's absolutely zero. And I think that's the point that you made. Oftentimes these schools are the only employer. I mean, where I grew up, we had the public school, the gas station, and the post office. I remember when the Dollar General went in, but prior to that, the school really was the biggest employer unless folks wanted to drive an hour into town. And when we do this voucher program, what it does is it allows Missouri families, people who their income is very high, over hundreds of thousands of dollars, to qualify for this voucher to then, it's essentially a credit that families can then use to send their kids to a private school or a religious school, and then they get that taxpayer money back. And so when there is no other choice for your family but that one public school because you can't drive an hour to get to the private school that exists, then it doesn't serve anyone. All it does is take the money out of these small communities that need it desperately.
Well, in Kennett, and we had the main employer was the school and the hospital and Emerson Electric and Parker Hannafin. And of those four things, the only thing left is the school. So our hospital's gone, factories are gone. Rural Missouri is really struggling with both healthcare and jobs. How do you as governor propose to deal with those two issues? Those are very different issues, but those issues.
Let me just say it's a crisis in rural Missouri.
Yeah, I think crisis is the right word, and it's frustrating, and I can't even imagine for the folks who live here that it was a crisis that we saw coming. And lots of folks warned of, hey, if we don't start changing our ways, this is what's going to happen to the rural parts of our state. And as folks probably know, we've lost 18 rural hospitals in the last decade. And there are so many parts of our state that, you have to drive over an hour to get to an emergency room, truly life and death. So crisis is the right word. And I think first and foremost, as governor, it is our job to look at our state's budget as a moral document. And by that, I mean, when we are choosing where our money's going, it needs to be in places that are directly impacting the citizens of our state. Things like access to the basic services, healthcare, education, utilities, infrastructure. Our roads and bridges are crumbling. I mean, we could talk all day long about these things. But instead, what we've been seeing over the years is investment in pet projects, given contracts for businesses who happen to be the largest campaign contributor to whoever's running that year. It has not been looked at in a way that really impacts Missourians. And so there's a multitude of things that I could respond to you of how we bring businesses back, how we do all this. But step one as governor is making sure as a state we're prioritizing the things that directly impact Missourians every single day, and not just the wealthiest, not just the big corporations or our friends.
So one of the things that I know has a lot of people frustrated is that politics have become so divisive. That's one of the reasons that Barry and I, when I first came to work up here, we talked about this particular forum because we wanted to talk about, and that was that was 4 years ago, and we talked during that election campaign, which was very divisive, about the issues and about how to do that in a way that wasn't so angry. And so this is a huge question, how do we possibly mend that rift that exists right here in Missouri? I was in the legislature 20 years ago, and we got along. I still have friends that were on the other side of the aisle that I consider to be friends. And I know you have some of those, but it was most of the people on the other side of the aisle.
Yeah.
Now, our numbers were really close, so we had to work together. But how do we mend that? Is there a way to mend that?
I think that there is. Missouri is a place that has always been a bellwether. It goes back and forth. And I think that truly to its core, Missourians want what's best for their neighbors. You go to any small town and folks still deeply care about each other. You can still leave your car unlocked in places in Missouri. It's not too far gone, but I know it feels that way. And I'll tell you, even in my time in Jefferson City the past 8 years, when I first got there to where it is now is a drastic difference. And quite honestly, that's one of the reasons I wanted to jump into this race, is because the divisiveness has gotten so bad in our state capital that nothing is happening. We're literally not doing anything that's investing in Missourians and making their lives better because of all of the fighting. And it's not just Democrats and Republicans anymore. I mean, folks saw the Republican primaries in August with the flamethrowers and the ridiculousness. These guys went after each other hard. And there was almost $30 million spent just on that one side for those primaries back in August. And so this is a real problem. But like I said, I don't think it's too far lost. And the way we fix it is getting back to the basics. When I talk to voters, often, the national stuff comes up all the time. But my honest response back is, what's going on in Washington is Washington. I care about what's happening right here at home in Missouri, and going back to those conversations around healthcare and education and jobs and the things that are not partisan. And when you have those conversations with people and you get rid of the noise, the commonality still exists. Common sense is still there, and folks still want what's best for our state. And so it really comes down to electing people who want that, who don't get sucked into all of the noise and drama. There are real differences between parties still. We've got some very contentious issues on the ballot this year between parties, but again, there's so much that we have in common. I think a lot more than we disagree on, and it's important for us as candidates to bring it back to those conversations.
State Representative, so many people have become disillusioned with the voting process that they may not even vote this election. What do you say to that person out there that's considering not voting because they're so discouraged about the political process?
Again, I think I definitely understand why folks feel that way. And in a state like Missouri, when we used to be the bellwether and everybody paid attention to us, and now, folks think it's a solid red state, first thing I'll say is it's not. We're just a non-voting state. And if you look at the numbers, it shows that. And we are much more balanced than I think folks realize that we are. But what I really want to say to voters who are thinking about setting this election out is, when we look down at our local elections, the things that impact our day-to-day lives, the Missouri House of Representatives, our state Senate, the governor's race, some of these races have been won and lost by less than 50 votes. We had a state representative out in Lee Summit last election cycle flip a seat red to blue by 47 votes. I could give you example after example of elections that have been down to under 100 people. And when you talk about the differences between parties or what's going on, that can be a very drastic shift in a pro-education elected official and somebody who will sell our schools away. And so when folks feel disillusioned, I try to remind them that, again, what's going on the national level is the national level, but your vote on a local race, on the Missouri governor's race, on the state house races, really does come down to just a handful of people, and it is so important. And I also just try to remind folks that, the folks that you disagree with are voting. And so it's important that you get out there and share your thoughts too.
That's a good point.
In Missouri, we know that there's a percentage of the populace that's going to vote Republican. There's a percentage of the populace that's going to vote Democrat. But there's that group in the middle that consider themselves fairly independent. And they are in the middle. They're not far right or far left. So neither of those the parties have 50% plus one. So how do you engage that independent voter that doesn't vote for you because you're a Democrat and doesn't vote against you because you're a Democrat? How do you engage that independent voter?
Yeah, I think it goes back to, again, some of the issues that we've been talking about. I think it's really important that voters know who I am and where I come from. So I appreciate that first question out the gate, because it really does dictate the kind of legislator that I've been and the kind of governor that I will be, is putting regular working class Missourians front and center in the decisions that I'm making. And and investing in things like public education, because without public school, I would have never made it to where I am now. And so part one is making sure that folks know who I am. I am a candidate who will never shy away from answering a question, even if you're going to disagree with me, because I think it's so important that people know where I stand. The other piece of this is, again, trying to get rid of the extreme noise that we're seeing. You know, a lot of the candidates who are running in our statewide offices right now, and my opponent included, have jumped on the bandwagons on the far right to win their primaries, and often vote along that line, even if they seem like they're maybe a moderate person. They are falling in line because that's what the super majority, you know, almost forces out of these elected officials to do for them to continue to win. And so I think it's so important when we're talking about to these independent voters about prioritizing the issues that I know are important to them, that are important to me, talking about what I'm going to do as governor and where our investments are going to go, and, you know, just sharing that message everywhere that I can. I'm not just focusing on the cities. You know, I've gotten some flack from folks like, you don't spend enough time in the cities. I don't spend enough time anywhere. Missouri is a huge state, but it's also important that we're showing up in places that a Democrat, maybe, you know, folks say, why are you down there? They're not going to vote for you. Listen, there are so many independent and undecided voters still, and frankly, a lot of Republicans who feel like their party's left them, and they're not ready to call themselves Democrats yet, but they definitely want to hear what I have to say. And so it's important to show up in those spaces and be present as much as I can.
You made a good point there, Crystal. The Missouri Freedom Caucus, for example, I mean, they try to blow up everything. Mm-hmm. Most of it's theatrics. Because if they really believe that stuff, they would never win an election, right? I don't know how all of them became experts on the immigration policy. None of them have ever held like real jobs in the private sector, but all of a sudden they're experts on everything. I mean, nobody should believe anything that these guys, well, the one female that they had, I think, left. She got kicked out of the Freedom Caucus. Yeah. So they go to, I mean, illegal immigration, it's something that's concerning to everybody. Mm-hmm. Everybody thinks an immigrant should be documented when they come into our country. But if you've noticed traveling rural Missouri, it's really not a problem in Missouri. It's way overblown. Yeah. And my follow-up question is, you've seen lots of immigrant labor working around here. You're getting ready to see a lot as soon as you leave here. I mean, it's the backbone of our agricultural economy. Mm-hmm. So how, the disconnect between the voter and like the Freedom Caucus, they think they're experts on immigration policy all of a sudden. Mm-hmm. How do you connect with the voter that, you know, rapists, drug dealers, kidnappers, that's really not a problem in the state of Missouri?
I mean, it's, to be very honest with you, it's difficult, and we're seeing that, right? You know, the Freedom Caucus folks have elevated this message, and it's working, and quite honestly, there's a lot of money going into that side of these political fights. I mean, again, the Republican primary itself had almost $30 million spent in it, and when you've got that much money spreading a message, folks are going to listen, and it is a thing that concerns people. Look, my family has lost a family member to a drug overdose, as too many Missourians have, and when we talk about drug trafficking and all of these things, you know, it's scary. It is a scary conversation. But to your point, you know, Missouri's agriculture industry is one of our largest in the state, and we rely heavily on our immigrant population to help us deliver what we need to be delivering, not only here at home, but across the country. And so to answer your question on how we break down this disconnect is having as much honest dialogue as possible about this, right? Yes, it is concerning. Yes, people are concerned about it. As governor, my job will be to work with our federal delegation to pass the bipartisan bill that was written by Republicans, that's been sitting in Washington for over a year now. As governor, my job is to make sure that we're talking to our federal delegation and finding out, do you actually need support or not, and what does that look like? And as governor, our job is to focus on Missouri and what's happening right here at home. And instead of what we've been seeing is this rhetoric that is just winning them elections. And I think to partner that with the previous conversation, because of that dialogue and that rhetoric, a lot of voters feel like they should just sit out because, you know, it doesn't matter what I think anyway. The extremists are the ones who are winning, and it is a self-fulfilling prophecy because that is the message that they're seeing on the TVs. It's frustrating to folks, so then they don't vote because they think their vote doesn't matter. Well, then the folks that are in the Freedom Caucus continue to think that they are the majority because they're the only ones who are actually winning their races. And so, it is a big hurdle, and it's something that I think we're not going to fix just this election cycle. It's going to take some time. But again, it goes back to having candidates on both sides of the aisle who will tell the truth and stop playing into this rhetoric and flying down to the border to make their campaign commercials, and oftentimes on taxpayer money, instead of going out to the local farms and asking what's going on right here at home. And I hope that we can continue to move the needle and have candidates who are doing that.
So you mentioned earlier that when the discussion about Missouri being a bright red state as opposed to its former bellwether status, you mentioned that it's really a situation where folks don't get out to vote. So how do you get those folks out to vote? What inspires them? Are there issues that inspire them that may get them out to vote in this particular election that may not be there in others?
Yeah, I definitely think that Amendment 3 is going to be something that we see increased voter turnout across the board. That's the restoration of abortion access. And folks probably know that right now Missouri has the most drastic abortion ban in the entire country, without exceptions for rape and incest. And in fact, we just had over 800 doctors across the state of Missouri sign on to a letter saying they support Amendment 3 because the current law that exists in Missouri does not allow them to do their jobs as doctors and save the lives of mothers who are in crisis. And they're worried about going to jail, quite frankly, and they can't actually do their jobs. This is an issue that I know is deeply personal for so many people. What I will say, though, is I travel every corner of the state. I am hearing from folks across party lines who are in support of Amendment 3 and, quite frankly, want politicians out of their personal lives. We have heard so many stories of women who have wanted pregnancies, who are in active miscarrying situation, going to the doctor's offices right now in our state and being sent home and literally being told you're not close enough to death yet, and so you have to go home and come back later. And that's a terrifying situation. As a mother, I personally know how terrifying pregnancy can be and how difficult it can be. And what we have in our state is a bunch of politicians telling families what is best for them and not letting them make decisions with their doctors. And this is a deeply personal one that I really think is going to increase the amount of folks who turn out. And not just women, but I would also say like young people. And so many, I've heard from fathers, almost every single person in the state of Missouri has either had a personal situation dealing with miscarriage, an unfortunate situation dealing with rape or incest, which is a real thing that is happening all the time in the state of Missouri. And so this is something that I think is going to really increase turnout in ways that we may be not expecting.
So you agree with Donald Trump on his fourth or fifth position now that it's up to the states, and you feel like you trust the states to decide this issue?
Yeah, that's what's been really frustrating about this. Of course, I was not in support of the overturning of Roe, but when that happened and they sent it down to the states, we had over 380,000 Missourians sign on to a petition in less than 3 months saying they wanted to vote on this. And we saw the Republicans in power try to stop this every step of the way. And I will say that the Amendment 3 abortion care is not the only time that we've seen politicians try to get in the way of initiative petitions and citizens having their say on whatever it is that it is, whether it's puppy mills or right to work, Clean Missouri, Medicaid expansion. And with this one in particular, we saw a lot of failed court cases from Jay Ashcroft where he tried to stop it from happening. And now we're seeing candidates and elected officials saying the first thing they're going to do in January, if Amendment 3 passes, is start to work to undo the will of voters. And it's really frustrating, I know for citizens, but myself, I'm also extremely frustrated that citizens continue to tell elected officials to do something, and then they turn around and don't listen to them. And I'm fearful that this is going to be another one of those situations. And so it's really important that we are also electing people who will respect the will of voters.
I think the irony of that situation, too, I think the statistics prove this out. There's actually was an increase nationwide in abortions after Roe versus Wade was overturned. So if you're on the other side of that issue, you really didn't get out of it what you were planning to. So
Absolutely. And I would say what's also important about Amendment 3 is it's not just about access to that abortion care. It's also protecting birth control and IVF, which is huge. Last year in Jefferson City, we had a state senator literally say that IVF was next. and so they're telling us exactly what the plan is here. And again, IVF, birth control, family planning is so important to everyone, regardless of political party. And so, there's a lot of misinformation out there right now about Amendment 3. I encourage folks to read it. It's about allowing families to choose what's best for them with their doctors, getting politicians out of our personal business. And quite frankly, the amount of government overreach that we continue to see in the state of Missouri is, again, another one of the reasons I wanted to jump in this race, not just in the doctor's offices, but it's what books our kids can read. It's whether or not we have clean drinking water down in our local levels. They've taken away the local control and decision-making power and bringing it all to the politicians in Jefferson City. And I think, frankly, Missourians are tired of it.
Well, thank you so much, Representative. We appreciate you being with us, but we're going to give you the last word. We're going to let you look right into that camera and speak directly to the people.
Well, first, thank you guys so much for having me here. And I want to thank everyone for the opportunity to introduce myself. And just want to remind folks that I'm running for governor because we deserve better than what we've been getting. You know, the state of Missouri ranks last in our public education funding and our teacher pay. We have the lowest paid state workers in the country. We've lost 18 rural hospitals in the last decade. We've got crumbling roads and bridges. You know, the list goes on. And the state of Missouri can't meet the basic promises that we are supposed to be doing. We're not even paying the bills on time right now to our child care providers. I know when folks call in to get help from Medicaid, they're on hold for 4+ hours, even if they get through it to a person at all. What we have is not working, and we deserve better than what we've got, and I'm offering a change. My opponent is part of the status quo, and I want to be Missouri's next governor because I know that we deserve better than what we've got.
State Representative Crystal Quade, Democratic candidate for governor, thank you for joining us in the arena. Don't forget to vote November 5th.